Hello, and
Hello.
welcome to this one-on-one interview with Kris Wong from Metrics 360.
Good morning. How are things?
I'm good, and you?
Doing well. It's 8 a.m. over here in Canada, so it's an early morning or semi-early morning for me. I've been up for a few hours, but yeah, it's good. It's bright and sunny out, so that's great.
Okay, so it's early morning, and you've been up for a few hours. When do you wake up in the morning?
Depends on the day. I usually get up at about 6:30, have a coffee, read the news. I'm a big believer in reading through my little Reddit threads and stuff, seeing what's going on in the world. But I'm assuming my schedule will all change. I'm having a child at the end of this month, so that schedule is out the window at when baby comes. So we'll see.
I'll talk to you again in 6 months or a year, and we can see how it changed.
Yeah, when I crawl out of the baby hole, when I get back to a little bit of a routine or whatnot.
Yeah. Maybe, do you want to, let's start with your background, Kris, for anyone who don't know you. You said you're based in Canada?
I am, yeah. So I'm based out of Ottawa. Lived here for a while. I've traveled the world. I actually launched call centers all over Asia with Dell International Services way back when. Some of the most interesting work, and I had some really cool experiences of doing that. But yeah, I've lived in Ottawa for the last better part of 25 years. Yeah. So right now I'm with a company called Metrics Data 360. It's based out of just outside of Toronto in Guelph. And the leader there, Mike Austin, kind of recruited me into the organization fairly recently. So that's where I'm at. So I spend about 50% of my time right now working on SAM problems or SAM situations for clients, and then 50% on the business, on growing it, on operationalizing it and stabilizing it, so that it can scale and we can deliver better outcomes to more customers.
Okay. So how many years have you been, so you mentioned that you used to work for Dell. How many years have you worked in the software licensing industry?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've been doing it probably since 2009, 2010. I got a little bit into it at Alcatel, Lucent, which is a fairly big telco producer. And then I moved over to General Dynamics and kind of took over their software asset management program. I kind of fell into it there, where we had budgetary restrictions. It was a down economy for defense spending, and so got a mission to cut the fat from IT. Fun situation as an early 20-year-old going into a little bit of a monolithic organization and trying to trim the fat. So I cut my teeth there. It was a little bit painful. We had no tools, very little expertise on the software licensing front. So I had to just learn basically everything from first principles, looking at renewals, asking the questions, the dumb questions. And I did it all manually, and people say, what's the best tool in SAM? It's probably Excel. Honestly, I basically built that Canadian program out of Excel. And then once we got into the process side of things and understanding where could be trimmed, what should be trimmed, we kind of rolled that out to the US and actually to our UK operations and Italy and one operation in Australia. So it was a fun, better part of 5 years that I was there. Very interesting work, very different than I'd ever experienced. Defense space is very cost heavy, very capital heavy. So there's lots of fun things to learn about. Plus you get to look at tanks and laser guided missile things and helicopters. So it was quite, it kind of it catered to the geek in me of all this technology stuff. So yeah, so I did that, and then I moved on to actually do a little bit of board work with the Canadian Medical Association. So I worked with their board to do program program review, program management. So we looked at from a top level, basically all the services that they're in. And we started to put recommendations back to the board on what could be done around those particular programs, so that they could kind of focus on their niche. At that point, I wasn't working on licensing at all. It was more from a business organizational perspective on, how do you focus your organization? And then I jumped. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So when you first started getting into licensing, how did you even start in the beginning? Were you given a task, or was it by chance that you ended up with software licensing? Or tell me the story behind it.
Yeah. So how did I get started? So I think one day the CIO at GD in Canada sat me down and he said, "Kris, we need to cut our budget by 50%. And I said, "Oh. All right, how do we do that?" And he says, "I don't know, but you'll find out." So I have a little bit of background in finance, and at that time I was going to B school. And so we pulled out the financials and figured out that, the top cost in their business was human resources. It's one of the areas I didn't want to play in. It was a unionized shop, and HR is just not something I'm interested in at all. Second top line item was the bucket of O&M, operations and maintenance, which included hardware cost, software cost, and this outsourcing cost per device that we were paying to the outsourcer of choice. So we took a fairly high level view and said that was the second highest budget or line item on our budget. Let's deep dive. And the challenge when you're taking that approach is that you have no idea what's in that bucket. Like just at a P&L level or a budget level, like you don't really know what's in it. And so we had to do investigation, and that took better part of 6 months to understand what are the titles in there, what's driving, like what are the cost drivers. So and from that analysis, 3 projects really spun out of it. One was around software containment, software cost reduction. One was around hardware consolidation. We had probably about 700 or 800 servers sitting in a data center somewhere that like took up so much space, and we really needed less than a third of that if you modernized. And the fourth one was around printers. We had printers pretty much every 4 feet in the building, and we were spending so much money on ink. It was it was insane. And so, one of my coworkers took on the hardware piece with, I helped work with him on that. And then I took on the printer stuff, which is fairly easy. We just outsourced that. And then the software stuff, which was better part of, 2 years of my life, figuring out, it didn't take hard or long to figure out what needed to be done. But as contracts roll up, like sometimes you're in a 3-year contract and only in the first year. So you can't, you know what you're going to do at the end of that contract, but to execute against it, you have to wait till that time. Or you could theoretically break those contracts. And so that's what I did. I'm happy to report though, we, over 18 months, we took out about 45% of the spend in that bucket. Just like canceling things, removing things, right sizing. So it was quite good. And I always look fondly back at that time because the CFO at the time, this guy named Mike Wellness said, "Hey, we should pay you a percentage of the savings." And I said, "Yes." And my the CIO at the time's like, "You don't want to pay him a percentage. He would be making more than both of us combined." So that was that.
But one thing would be like, wow, I should be saying extremely wow, but it's if we live in this bubble where we know, there's huge savings to be made, especially in software. Just want to ask you, which software vendor, when it came to licensing, did you start with? Did you start with IBM, or where did you begin?
That's a good question. I think I actually probably started more with Microsoft. I looked at so we took a really a top level. What is your spend? Microsoft was one of the top spends. Oracle was in there second or third. IBM was in there. And then we had all these weirdware things, BMC, this, that, and the other. So I probably at the time looked at Microsoft first, but again, as a little bit of a secret here is that although I've specialized in Oracle and IBM as of late, I approach things from kind of a first principle of, and in software licensing, I look at the contract, meaning I go to the lines that grant you licenses, and I try and understand what that means. So there's all these tips and tricks in each publisher to look at, but for the most part, I can do anything under the sun. As long as you can get that agreement level, the legal language, you read through that, you understand it, and go from there. But the big pivot point in the experience at GD was when we got hit with an Oracle audit. And my boss's boss, so it's a little bit decentralized, but my CIO had a reported dotted line into the US. They got hit at corporate with an Oracle audit, and I was nominated to help understand the situation and provide a defensible position. So we had a partial ULA. We had a ULA that extended to all affiliates, but it was only some products. And you know this from ULAs. People think that it's an all-you-can-eat buffet of everything under the sun. But when you start reading through it, it's like, well, it's only certain products. And if they released a product after you signed it, it's not included, right? Unless you have some language that indicates that. So we got into a little bit of a situation where there were products that were in test dev, non-production, mind you, that had been toyed with by somebody in business, and we had to account for those. And it ended up being a slogfest back and forth of just dealing with the interesting techniques that LMS use. During this process, actually, the CAD, I don't know if you know what CADs are, the key account director, you basically said, I'm fed up with this, and he left them. It was like, it was really bad. It was not a great relationship, but one thing that CAD said at one point was basically, he's like, why do we care? We know you're on our technology, like, you're gonna have to use it forever. And at that time, one of the top people at corporate said, like, we need a plan. We need a plan to get off this. It's a 10-year plan, but we got a plan. So that's what they put into motion. And hopefully the relationship sweetened back up and everything worked out. But when I left, it was still kind of a sore spot in their relationship.
Yeah, well, that's usually Oracle. Oracle have very good products, but their relationship with customers doesn't seem to be that good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's their strategy, right? Like their database is literally the best technically in the world, but you really don't need it for everything. So it is what it is.
We have a question here from Alex. Small independent consultancy versus LSP/large SAM firm. Okay, so maybe we put it like this, Kris. Because you're working at a small independent firm, why is it better to go to you than to go to a large firm and buy SAMs or license services?
Well, one, because you're going to get the dedication of our team to deliver you the right thing, and we follow you along the journey. One of the things that we found with some of the large SAM consulting firms is that they're kind of point in time. They'll deliver the value or the outcomes you're looking for, but then they kind of walk away. And for us, we like to get people on kind of a managed service. We like to touch base with our clients on an ongoing basis. We like to understand what their actual drivers and challengers are so that we can understand their situation holistically. And we can stretch across different vendors, right? We don't only do Oracle or only do Microsoft or only do IBM. We can go stretch. And if we need to, we will call in independent consultants in areas that we're not super familiar with to bolster our services. And that's kind of our kind of go-to right now. I've done the LSP stuff and I've done the independent consulting. I probably would still be independently consulting had it not been for a few kind of interesting decisions in my career path and some interesting meetings with people. But the challenge with being an independent consultant is that it's really hard to scale. You can't really scale except with time. And I was working, 12, 14 hours a day at peaks. And then, when we weren't busy, I'd spend a couple hours doing emails or calls and then kind of be at peace and go do my own thing on my personal life. But one thing that is clear is that I'm not a great salesperson. I don't like selling things if you don't need it. Once a qualified lead comes in and like you have a problem, I'm happy to have that conversation, but like cold calling isn't for me. Emailing, time prospecting, I can't do it. Like I find that it's very hard. And so as an independent consultant, you should be spending about 50%, maybe 60% of your time doing that, and then 40% doing the delivery side of it. There's a great book called The Consultant's Bible. Highly suggest reading that if you're going into independent consulting. It really talks about how to do it more effectively. And one of the best things that I did was whenever I delivered a project successfully, I, talk to the key stakeholder and say, thank you for the business or whatever. If you ever hear or know of another or person in your network that needs help, just refer me. That's the best testament to my services, and that worked pretty well. We got most of my business was through referrals. It wasn't through prospecting. I found that I wasted my time doing that, calling up companies. They don't even know what SAM is in North America for the most part, right? So it's that's kind of my suggestion for the independent consulting. And then at the LSP, I was at a large LSP in Canada for a while, and then I stood up their managed services around SAM. It was good, but it's hard for account managers and salespeople to really know what SAM is in that context. They just think it's a tool and they pitch a tool. And then when you get to the client, it's like, well, yeah, we do have a tool and we have a go-to tool, but it's more than that. There's a value prop behind it. And it's a little bit less about the tool and more about like, what are the outcomes and the values you're going to get out of this? Does it align to your business strategy? And so it's very hard to kind of educate the salesforce in that organization or in those organizations to do that, because it's a much harder sale than, we have product X, a commodity, push it. We have this pure storage, push it. So we found that was some of the challenges in the LSP world. Also, I think sometimes there's a little bit of conflict of interest in terms of, do you want to sell them licenses or do you want to deliver SAM? And can you do both? Hopefully you take an ethical line there and say, we're going to deliver the SAM services and start to cut your software spend. But of the software spend that you are going to make, you're going to hopefully make with us. And you kind of play that you take that gamble.
Okay. I think just to clarify, you did start a company called Beaconize, right? And that's what you were talking about, right? Okay. What made you, because I had this conversation yesterday with someone who was thinking about starting a company. Yeah. And I said, a lot of people are just dreaming about the idea or playing with the idea, but very few actually take the jump. And what was it that made you take the jump in starting a company from just playing around with the idea?
So I started that company actually. So the genesis of Beaconize was actually a little bit interesting. I had a company. Me and some friends in university started a company that built mobile apps, and I had that kind of sitting around. Doing stuff, it's kind of set dormant. And then after I worked for an independent consulting firm called Rapid Consulting that did SAM. After that kind of folded, they basically shut that down. I had a choice of going back and trying to find a job, or just to spin out and take my knowledge and do SAM consulting independently. And so I decided that I was going to do that. It turns out that was a great choice for me. I was able to find some early clients, but it was really born out of necessity. I kind of the consulting firm I was with folded. Not that they decided to shut it down, and it was either go find a job somewhere or do what you do. And it was good because what had happened is somebody had approached me like right in similar time frame and asked me to do some work for them. So I said, okay, sure, but it's got to be under this brand, and went forward. But I do suggest having a company. Don't do it as a sole proprietorship. It's much more clean from a tax perspective, at least in Canada, if you have a dedicated company to to flow things through.
And how much money would you recommend someone would have in the bank account before they start? Because obviously it's going to take some time before you start getting a business in. What would you recommend that they would have? How many months could they actually survive without having any business? How many months would you recommend that they have?
That's a good question. Well, for me, I'm a saver, so I always have money tucked away in case of emergency. I'm trying to think back. I probably had only about 5 to 10K squirreled away at the time. If I were to do it again, I'd probably suggest having about 6 months live frugally by yourself or through your family. To be able to do it. It takes time to prospect and qualify leads and bring on clients. It just takes time. And then not only that, you have to play this game about what are the payment terms. Sometimes great customers, you work with them really well, but they have net 75, which means you have to wait after you final delivery, you have to wait 75 days to get your money, which is a cash flow nightmare, especially as a small business. So you got to kind of plan that out. So if you're asking me what I would do is I'd probably take about 4 to 6 months of runway. And I would probably orchestrate it so that you at least have in the first month a customer, right? Don't be like right now I'm fairly price insensitive, meaning if you want to lowball me, I'm just not going to do the work. But at that time, I was like, yeah, sure. Like, let's just jump into it, right? You have to be opportunistic at that point as you build your brand, build your name, and start to learn that it's being an independent consultant is hard work, like extremely hard work. Nobody has a time card. Like if you're doing T&M, how are you going to invoice on a time? How are you going to record what you worked on at certain times? Because some clients are great and they're like, sure, no problem. And some are like, well, what does this mean? What's this note on the 4th? What's this on that, right? So you need to be able to have systems in place to be able to do that and to be professional about it. You can't just say, oh, here you go. And on that note, if you're going to do this, I would suggest avoiding some of the T&M stuff and just do fixed fee, like $5,000 for this, $10,000 for that. It makes it easier starting out. T&M is fairly challenging. It also doesn't incentivize you to do quick work, meaning if you're on T&M and it could take you 3 hours to do something or 8 hours, as a consultant, you're probably going to take 8 hours because, you make 1.5 times what you were going to make, right?
That's a really good tip, this fixed fee. What would you recommend? Would you recommend that you specialize in one or two vendors, or should it be a generalist? What's your advice?
I can only talk really about my experience. So I've specialized in Oracle and IBM. Those are the two areas that I will tout myself as an expert on. I mean, I can do Microsoft. I can do all the others. I think you need a solid foundation in everything. and the process side, honestly, because understanding how that flows in a business is important. But from a strictly licensing perspective, I think specialization makes sense. Nobody's going to, especially if you're doing the independent consulting, right? You want to get in, be very surgical with it. You're probably not going to be offering a managed service on an ongoing basis at that point, because you probably don't have the cycles to deliver that. So I think specializing makes sense. As you grow and expand, I think bolstering the specialization with, some generalists or folks that can, tackle different publishers makes sense, right? Because then you can kind of, you've landed a customer, you can then expand into from Microsoft to Oracle, or from Microsoft to Adobe, or whatever the case may be. But if you're setting up the business, I think it does make sense to start with a specialization and then move to a generalization.
You are in Oracle and IBM. Do you think it's too many or too few firms that are good at Oracle licensing?
Honestly, I don't think there's that many firms that do Oracle. We have our group and we talk to people. I think there's less than a dozen firms out there, and in those firms, there's maybe one or two people that are good. Honestly, it's such a unique and rare skill set. Not because it's terribly difficult to learn, it's because how many people get the experience of going through thousands of servers and reading LMS scripts? Not many. How many people would put themselves through that punishment? Not many, right? And so, again, I think anybody, or maybe not anybody, but a large portion of the population could become an expert on Oracle or IBM or Microsoft, but nobody does because it's tedious. It's terribly difficult and painstaking to learn what does this flag on this parameter mean? And there's no references out there. So one of the good things here is that when we put out information, or we share our knowledge in the community, listen, right? Because this stuff is really, it's gold, in my opinion. But getting back to your question, I think, I think there's probably a half dozen, maybe a dozen good Oracle firms out there, and of that, maybe one or two good Oracle people in each of those firms.
It was because I could see here someone was saying, there's too many firms out there, and I actually thought it would be the opposite, because I think the more firms out there, the stronger the sort of the community, and the more qualified staff it would be out there. It speaks for itself. The more firms there are out there, the more people that work with it, the bigger the Oracle licensing industry will be, and then it will come up more people that have the necessary skills and learn them. Because you told me one time on LinkedIn that it's so difficult to find the good people in this industry.
Yeah. Well, I think speaking more generally, but in Oracle, in any of the publishers, I think skills are short. They just don't exist, Fred. I can't. So many times at my last firm, when I was there, I was asked, who would you hire? If you had unlimited budget, who would you hire? And I was like, these guys. But they all run either their firm or they're very high up at another organization. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. So how do we build those skills? And it's like, that's a good question, right? How do you teach people to read contracts? Do you take somebody from a legal background? How do you it's exceedingly tough, because in software asset management, the skills are very diverse. You need a technical lens, you need a legal lens, you need a business lens, and you need to be able to interact with people. There are a lot of good people out there that can do the auditing side, the analytical side, and that's less of the area that I think there's shortages around. I think it's more how do you talk to people, kind of flex from the technical to the business back to the financial, like that's where I find it's very challenging. At least for in me. I think Europe's ahead of the game though. I think there's more out there. You know, you have people that are trying to educate everybody, but yeah, there's just such a shortage. So if you know anybody, Fred, especially in North America and on my time zone, I'm happy to take advice.
No, but yeah, I would just my own reflection. Have you heard about the Pareto principle, where 20% is making the difference? Right. It was the same thing when I worked at Oracle. Lots of people not doing anything, and there's 20% who actually makes the company move forward. It's been the same at other companies I worked as well. And that if you look at that, the same in the SAM industry, 20% are good, 80% just clocking in. One good question is, because I used to work with someone who had 15 years of Oracle licensing experience. He knew everything, or he or she. But then we got a complaint from two customers that he or she was working on, that like, this consultant doesn't know anything what they're talking about. And then I was quite surprised, because I know how much he or she knew. But then it turns out, when I do some research, that he or she was not able to take all of this knowledge that he or she had about Oracle licensing and explain it in a way so the people couldn't understand it. And I think that's what you said here. You can't bridge your knowledge in licensing and present it to the customer in a good way. I think that's the major lack, at least what I come across, is that you have analytical people, but they're not very good at explaining it to the customers.
Yeah, it's that customer communication skill, and I struggle with that sometimes too. How do you take an ultra complex situation and simplify it down to a sentence or two for clients? Because when you're talking to C-levels about complex licensing issues, and they want to know what the issue is, you can't say, well, here you go. You're virtualized over here, and Oracle is likely not to believe that it's been separated, and this, that, and the other. They're going to want to know in very short and sweet what the issue is. So you have to distill it down, and it's a skill, and it takes time. Like sometimes when I work on executive summaries or whatever, like the content's there, but how do you frame it? And it takes me time. I'm not super great at it, but I'm getting better.
Yeah, I think there might be, maybe this is controversial, but there might be too many in this industry that's coming from the data analysis point, and not enough people that are coming from the legal or the commercial area. Because I think it's easier for someone who's been in the legal or commercial area to know the licensing. It's much harder to move from maybe not always. But if you've been just analyzing things in the background, then suddenly you're going to be, being a good consultant. I think that jump is bigger than the opposite.
I would agree. I think moving from technical into the licensing legal space is quite challenging, because you're not used to reading and understanding legalese. I got a weird background, right? Like I did a lot of technical stuff, but I also went to business school, and so reading and doing legal courses makes sense. I'm not a lawyer. I don't claim to be, but I can at least get the gist of what a license grant gives you and the limitations associated with it. I think I agree with you. I think moving from a technical to a licensing role is challenging. I think moving from a legal role to the technical though is quite challenging too. I don't know of any legal folks that would actually understand how Active Directory functions, or how a database, the difference between like an analytical process versus a transactional process. Like I don't. So there's both. You need both skill sets, and it's very unique to have both in one individual. In fact, I far and few between.
Well, a very good point, but I think there's lots of let's say analysts in our business, right? There's not enough people who've been in the legal that, yes, you cannot know that you should not spend time to learn all the technical, but you can learn the basics and maybe medium about the licensing. and then you take use of the data analyst to explain the very technical things. But I think that would actually, because if you come from a legal background or maybe a procurement background, I think you have often a more senior position in your company as well. That would actually be able to communicate better with executives.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that they're better communicators. With the exception of maybe some lawyers. Some lawyers are hard to communicate with because they want to be, it's the minutia that they care about. A good lawyer, though, can communicate quite well. Yeah.
There's a question here. So here's from Alex again. Kris, what's your mission in one sentence?
What is my mission? One sentence too. Yeah, great, Alexander. Thank you. Great question. My mission. I think it's probably not going to be. I'm not going to meet the goal of one sentence here, Fredrik or Alexander. But I really want to kind of democratize the SAM space. Make sure that it's a level playing field between the licensees and the licensors. I really think that the two sides of kind of this marketplace of licensors selling licenses to licensees is asymmetric. I think that the power structure is heavily weighted towards the licensor of penalizing and controlling and leveraging their position for financial gain. And so if we can do, my goal, my mission, as Alexander puts it, is to help equalize that, to balance that out, to try and help end user organizations get the best deal that they can, given the context and the situation that they're in.
Maybe this comes back to the question before about leveling the playing field. Which vendors do you think that there's not enough information out there in the public domain? So let's say that you're thinking about starting your own company. Which vendors do you think there's no real good consultancy firms out there and they could fill a space in helping?
So this is a great question. And this actually has come up fairly recently. And my answer to this is probably around Quest and Micro Focus. But the reason for it is a little bit different than it's not that there's ultra complex. It's just the information doesn't exist out there. And there's thousands of software titles and metrics in each one of those publishers. I hopefully don't, I can't say this on interview, but a lot of companies are absorbed by Micro Focus and Quest. And not a lot of research and development goes into those after the fact, meaning that they just basically leave them and then sweat them for the maintenance costs and then audit. And so you have hundreds, if not thousands of titles, different license metrics that you have to understand. And for instance, the HP portfolio was absorbed into Micro Focus, right? And UMC CMDB is very different than AttachMate and how it's measured and the legal restrictions and the license grant. So I think that there's probably an opportunity in that space to thrive. Same with Quest. Quest has umpteen things there. I think that those two. I mean, there's probably space still in the Oracle and IBM and Microsoft because they have a large market share and people seem to struggle with it. However, those are the two that I even find it's hard to find any firms out there that specialize in them. Perhaps there's no market for it too. Although considering I've seen Micro Focus and Quest audits go up in the last 12 months exponentially, then maybe they're creating their own market. I don't know. We'll see.
What do you think about Salesforce?
Well,
could there be a room there to start a firm to specialize in Salesforce?
I think there's probably room in Salesforce. The challenge with Salesforce is this: they already have all the data. It's about tweaking the technical lens, reading the contracts. It's similar to SAP. SAP, every contract seems to be different. And Salesforce, they're more boilerplate. I haven't seen a lot of Salesforce audits. So from the predatory lens, I don't think that will drive the opportunity. But if you can figure out on Salesforce how to tweak contracts to deliver cost savings, by all means. I don't have a lot of exposure to it. Yeah, I think it was a great initiative because I do know that there's certain weird things where they don't limit where the administrators are and the roles and profiles. And they can at any time kind of turn on the audit key because they have all the data, right? They can say, okay, click programmatically, these customers are out of compliance. Let's go send our salespeople over here. I think Benioff and Mark Benioff from Salesforce is probably not as predatory as Larry is from Oracle, but I think they could do it. Change of leadership, they could probably do it.
But what you just said about Salesforce, that's for Oracle as well. They have all the data, and if you move to Oracle Cloud, it says the audit clause is basically we can whenever measure your consumption and then send you a bill that you have 30 days to pay.
Sure, but how many people on Oracle Cloud?
It's actually getting more and more. I was actually saying it to someone. We are almost in almost every client engagement now. It's something in the cloud. So just compared to a few years ago, where you basically never heard about it. When people said Oracle and cloud, they were laughing and say, "No, we haven't had an audit." That was usually when they talked about Oracle and cloud, it was because of an audit, right?
Is that mostly on the SaaS side though, or the PaaS side?
Software as a service. Lots, actually.
Okay.
Not on the platform.
Like I know that when Oracle rolled out their Gen 2 cloud, because their Gen 1 had issues, from a technical lens, again, like Oracle is, and I think we mentioned this earlier, is like Oracle puts out good, technically sound solutions, no doubt about it. I mean, Gen 2 cloud is probably better architected than a lot of the other competitors out there. The problem is that the market uptake is just, I deal with some folks that have subscribed to like NetSuite and stuff like that, but and that's on the SaaS side, but not, I haven't really seen them take the IaaS, the PaaS side of it. SaaS for sure, but maybe that's changing, and I hope it does change. But I also think that people should go in with eyes wide open and make sure that their contracts are a little bit ironclad, not just accept boilerplate ones. That's a recipe for disaster, because if they want to just audit you, they just audit you. But anyways, hopefully they do well.
Yeah. Let's. What are you doing at Metrics Data? When did you start at Metrics Data, or is it 360? Sorry, I got the name wrong.
Metrics Data 360. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mouthful. I always call it MD. But yeah, so when I came on working with Mike as a senior licensing specialist, and my role is kind of split into two sides. I work on the delivery side, meaning I deliver projects for clients, both as a one-time engagement as well as to our managed service clients. And then on top of that, I work on the business, on how do we tighten up, scale, what does our development plan look like? I act as a product manager for the development efforts around the automation that we're building or that we've built, the tweaking of kind of our customer portals, that and all of the products that we have. So that's kind of my role now. I joined in February, so it's been a couple months. I think I'm doing pretty well, but I guess we'll have to talk to Mike. Maybe you can talk to Mike at some point from him about that. Yeah, it's interesting because Mike's background is mostly around Microsoft. And so his strategy here was like, he found me, he enticed me to come over to kind of bolster out some of his services, right? Because he knows that I do Oracle and I do IBM. And so that's two of the top maybe 5 or 6 publishers, right? So that's his strategy. He started with the Microsoft. So going back to the question, he started with Microsoft and now he's starting to expand. And we've in the past used third parties. We've contracted out for some of the services, and now at least on the Oracle and the IBM, we're bringing it in-house, and we're building and developing the human capital, the procedures, and the know-how around how to tackle those particular products and publishers on an ongoing basis for all of our managed service clients.
Okay, and what kind of so are you delivering IBM projects, Oracle projects, Microsoft as well, or is it just IBM and Oracle?
For me, me specifically, I do mostly the Oracle and IBM. I sit in on some of the Microsoft ones, specifically around Azure and O365. We do have other ones around less known publishers, things like Veritas and Micro Focus and Quest. So do still, wet my beak on those publishers, but my main focus is around the IBM and the Oracle these days. And we try and take a little bit of a proactive approach, right? So reducing their, renewals, getting them, the best price on renewals and that type of thing from whoever they want to buy them for, and making sure that they're both compliant but also optimized. So,
by the way, I was watching by accident. It came up a recommendation video from, I think it was from you guys actually on this. Maybe let me see if I can share here. It was so good actually, and I was like, wow! And it made me realize maybe why people are liking our videos. Let me see if I can go here. So can you see my screen now? By the way, yeah. I think this is, yeah, exactly. I'm not, we are not partners in anything, right? But metrics, you guys from our company. But I thought this video, I don't know, have you seen this video?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was so good. I absolutely don't know anything about Office 365, but I could understand what he was doing in the video, and that made it so good. Because let's call it, if I wouldn't want to be Office 365, yeah, some people are a bit like, you've probably seen our mission video. Some people just want to learn and do it themselves, right? Yeah. But other people, I'm not the person who want to do it myself. And if I would need Office 365, I'm going to buy that service from someone who's an expert, right? And I thought, he's explaining so easily how you can optimize 365 in this video. I understand it, which I don't, and it's powerful if I can understand it and I don't know anything about the Office 365, because then I know if I go to him, that's the service I'm getting, right? And I told my partner, fucking hell, sorry, this is like why it's so good, to give value to people.
Yeah. So there's a strategy here, and our strategy is to make sure people know what we're going to deliver, but also what they can do on their own. The big difficult part on this is actually how you get the data and how you can combine it, right? And how do you analyze it? A lot of people don't have 20, 30 hours a month to go through and do that. And we simplify that. We make it quite easy. You outsource that. You offload it from you. So we put it together and we deliver the key insights that deliver kind of real value, right? So yeah, more of these will come out too. You'll see.
I think it was like, I think this was this one as well here. It was also, yeah. Have you seen this one, Kris? It's about Azure optimization. I think it's your tool, but he's basically explaining where you go in and look and everything. I thought it was great, and that made me think, okay, why are our videos popular? Is because we tell people this is how you can do it yourself, or come to us if you want help.
Yeah, I think so. And the one thing that's interesting about metrics data is that they can automate a large portion of this too, right? What used to take, like, you can get this data in CSV from your for Azure, you can do it from the cost management portal, but you have to figure out what that means to you. And with a few clicks, we can do it for you. And, hopefully you like that and we can, do some business in the future. But it's interesting because we learn as we go as well. And our clients help us understand what they're seeing and where they're seeing it. Like we've run into situations where the egress, ingress pipes weren't appropriately set up. And you see basically a cost spike because they're moving from one region to another or whatever. And so we work with our clients. So a lot of these things are actually built from client insights. The client tells us, we need this, we need that. And we take that, we build out a solution around it, and then kind of feed it back to everyone. So yeah, quite cool.
But it was the same thing in this video where I don't know anything about Azure, just had a look at it. Okay, I understand what it's doing. And if I would actually know something about Azure, I might just take the information and do it myself if I'm that person. But I'm the person who thinks, no, better to let the expert do it so I can focus on other things in my life, right?
Yeah. Well, there's another one coming out soon around IoT as a service where we actually offload the heavy lifting around IoT and deliver that. So you can just take your key insights out of it rather than fiddling with IoT and upgrading your software catalogs and bundling and stuff. So I'm not sure. I probably will be the one delivering that video actually. So you can stay tuned for that eventually.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And I think we sort of had, I told you before, we might do 30 or 40 minutes, but now we've had 52 minutes. So
there you go.
Thank you for coming, Kris, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, Fredrik.
Yeah, bye.